how about instead of judging ourselves, instead of criticizing ourselves, instead of punishing ourselves for whatever it is that we did or didn't do or said or didn't say or whatever it is that's coming up, what if instead we just got curious?
Welcome to Season of Stuck, the podcast that takes a deep dive into the all-too-human experience of feeling stuck. I'm your host, Deanna, and on this podcast, we explore all things stuck. How and why stuckness happens, what it feels like, how to learn and grow from it, and ultimately, how to get unstuck and move forward in an authentic, empowered way. If you are looking for insights, support, and community as you make your journey from stuck to unstuck, you're in the right place. Now, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Season of Stuck. If you are new here, welcome. This is a place where we talk about all things stuckness. So if you feel or have ever felt stuck, you'll fit right in. And if you're not new here, welcome back. And thank you for continuing to tune in. It means the very most. So let me ask you a question. Are there any overthinkers in the house? Any chronic worriers? Any people that get stuck and lose hours, days, even weeks spiraling on what happened in the past, what might happen in the future, or whether they forgot to turn off their flat iron before they left the house? Hi, me too. Same. All the time. I am at the core a worrier and overthinker. My brain is constantly in overdrive, feeding my anxiety with a rotating library of worst case scenarios, fears, both rational and irrational, and just general worry about things that have happened, things that might happen, and things that are highly, highly unlikely to ever happen, but let's worry about them anyway, because why not? Honestly, it's exhausting. And all of that worrying and thinking can make me feel extremely stuck. It's hard to move forward or grow or get things done or do really anything when your mind is so crowded with worries and fears and all of the thoughts, which is why I was so excited to talk to today's guest. Julia Kristina is a Vancouver-based clinical counselor that specializes in helping people get through the stuff that holds them back and keeps them from feeling good about themselves and their lives, including overthinking. Her course, The Shift Society, is an online community aimed to help you get past worry, overthinking, and self-doubt so you can have the calm, confidence, and emotional strength you've always wanted. In our conversation, Julia and I talk about what drives chronic worrying and overthinking, how those thinking patterns can get and keep you stuck, and how you can change your relationship to your thoughts and worries and get unstuck in the process. Here's a hint. There's a whole lot of compassion involved. Let's jump into my conversation with Julia. Julia, welcome to Season of Stuck.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so happy to be here and having this conversation.
I am so happy that you're here and having this conversation. This topic in particular is something that is so present and resonates with me so deeply. I am an overthinker to the maximum degree, like volume turned all the way up. And I know it's also something that a lot of other people struggle with. So I am really excited to hear your insights and talk about the topic.
Yeah. Deanna, the timing actually couldn't be better when I was going through what we're going to be talking about today. Funnily enough, just this week, I sat down and recorded a YouTube video all on tips to help us stop overthinking so much. Now, I don't know if this video will be out by the time that this podcast episode is out, but my brain is fresh into the content. So I think that we're going to have a great conversation today.
What serendipitous timing. I love when that happens, when just those synchronicities, everything comes together. Mwah, chef's kiss. I guess to kick things off, I'd love if you could introduce yourself to listeners and also tell us a little bit about what inspired you to get into the therapy field and also more specifically into exploring chronic worrying and overthinking.
Yeah. So going back to when I was 14 years old and sitting in the back seat of one of my best friend's parents' Honda Civic, sitting in the Safeway parking lot, waiting for her mom when she went to get groceries. She left the car on. We were listening to the radio, and there was this radio show at that time called Sex, Lies, and Audio Tape. And what it was, not as racy as it sounds, is it was a personal and relationship advice talk show. At the time, I didn't really know what this was, but someone called a registered clinical counselor. And it was people calling in with their personal issues, with their relationship issues. And she was helping them work through their problems. And I was like, what is this job? And how do I do this? And it was this one sort of serendipitous experience that tabled to the back of my brain until several years later, after I was finished my undergrad degree. Didn't really think I was very much of a school person, not very scholastic. And when I found out that it was going to be a minimum of 2 more years of university to get a master's degree, I was like, I'm out. I cannot do any more school. I'm not a school person. But then through a series of events and that tugging at my heartstrings and that kind of knowing in the back of my brain, there was one day where I was like, you know what, Julia, stop being a weenie and get your butt in gear and start working on building up your application to get into grad school, because you've been fluttering around trying to find an alternative passion for how many years now? And enough is enough. You've put all this time into finding an easy way out instead of just doing what you know you need to do. And then I started on the journey towards building up an application. It actually took me 2 years just to get into grad school, and then another 2 years of grad school, and way more than I ever thought. But I was so glad that I was ignorant and naive to how much work it was going to take, because I probably wouldn't have done it. But once I commit to something, there is very little that will get in my way. And I'm really grateful for that stubbornness in a way. My stubbornness to actually go back to school. And then once I decided this is what I needed to do, my stubbornness to not give up until I'd accomplished it. And then just feeling like this subject of understanding humans and our brains and our motivations and our feelings and our behaviors and our dynamics, I just felt like my life, like everything inside of me had been unlocked. And this is what I was meant to do. And yeah, so just been dedicating all of my spare time and more into just really understanding about human beings, and then sharing that knowledge with anyone else who is interested.
What an amazing experience to have that feeling of this is what I'm supposed to do. And then on top of it, for that thing that you're supposed to do to be in service to other people in such a meaningful way.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
There's really nothing more satisfying than explaining something to someone in a way that makes sense to them, and then watching the light bulbs go on and just seeing those connections being made. It's like, oh, that's something.
Well, you couldn't see me while I was watching your content, but I was having those light bulb moments many a times. So today we are talking about worry and overthinking. And I guess before we jump into things too deeply, from your perspective, what does it mean to worry or overthink? What's actually happening there?
Essentially, Deanna, we're trying to protect ourselves. As human beings, our core instinct is to keep ourselves alive. We have this very strong survival instinct. And so anything that seems out of our control or uncertain or unknown feels very vulnerable. And so somewhere in our brain, we've come to the conclusion that if I can overthink it, if I can stress and obsess and worry about it enough, maybe I can get some control over it. I can predict the outcome, or it's not going to be so painful if it doesn't go the way that I want it to. But we don't just overthink about things in the future, we also overthink about things in the past. And again, it's about that vulnerability. Why did I do that? What are they thinking? What does this mean? What's going to happen? What if this doesn't happen? What if they're assuming these things about me? How did I come across? Why did I say that? Why did I do that? And we get into this perseverating, this ruminating over our things, what we did in the past that we wish we wouldn't have, or maybe thought we should have done differently, and then what maybe might or could happen in the future. And all of this stuff, if we can look at overworrying, we overworry about things that we feel like they're out of our control and could potentially put us into some kind of vulnerable position.
I feel like you are in my brain right now because the things that you're saying is so my experience. It took me a long time to unlock what was actually going on, but I realized when my brain goes into this extreme worry, overthinking, what it's really trying to do is control.
Yeah.
And it's trying to control to keep me
It's
safe.
trying to protect you. Yeah. Our brains are actually, contrary to what many of us might think about our brains, they're actually on our side. They just misfire for a lot of different reasons, but our brains are actually, they're there to protect us and to preserve us, but they haven't always learned how to do that in the most healthy, helpful, productive, or serving ways.
It's one of those things where any sort of defense mechanism, it works until it doesn't. You started worrying or overthinking for a reason, and it got you to a certain place. It kept you safe. But then at a certain point, it starts to do more harm than good.
Totally. All behavior is purposeful. If we could just understand that about ourselves. And I teach this so much to my clients and to my students in my membership community is how about instead of judging ourselves, instead of criticizing ourselves, instead of punishing ourselves for whatever it is that we did or didn't do or said or didn't say or whatever it is that's coming up, what if instead we just got curious and just said, that's interesting. I wonder what was going on there, instead of, why did I do that? Or, what's going to happen? Being like, I wonder what's feeling vulnerable right now. I wonder what's happening inside. I wonder what's going on at that little bit of a deeper level. And we're a friend to ourselves, a curious, compassionate friend, instead of this micromanager that's scrutinizing everything.
I call that the drill sergeant in my head. And I'm curious, from your perspective, when you share that with people to make that shift out of judgment and into being more curious, how does that shift things with the relation to the thoughts?
It changes everything, Deanna, because we can't change anything if we're spending all of our time criticizing ourselves and beating ourselves up and feeling stupid and dumb and regretful. Like, it's interestingly enough, I just got a $300 parking ticket. I was using a car co-op, right? I don't know if you have those car co-ops there, but you can rent cars by the minute here, and just there's an app and you find your car. And I parked at 12 o'clock. I parked in a downtown spot that had no stopping after 3 p.m. I was like, it's right downtown. Someone's going to get this car before the no stopping goes into effect at 3 p.m. That's 3 hours. It's busy downtown, no problem. It was fine. It was a fine decision until it wasn't. And I got the notification that I was the last user of this car that had been towed because it was in a no parking zone at 3 p.m. And with the tow and the service fees and all the stuff, $300. And I could sit there and be like, Julia, you're so stupid. Why would you do that? What's wrong with you? You're pathetic. That was so dumb. Now you've got all this money and what are you going to do? And instead I'm like, okay, not your finest move. What do we want to take from this? What do we want to learn from this? What do we want to use from this? What's the useful information here for next time? Because beating myself up about it isn't going to change it, isn't going to solve it, isn't going to make me feel any better, and it's not going to make the outcome any different. So what about I just take a step back from this decision, this choice, this thing that I did thoughtlessly, and used it for my benefit for the future? And it's the same thing with our brains. I bombed that, or I shouldn't have said that, or that came across the wrong way, and just being like, okay, just let's take a little step back. How do I want to do this differently next time? What do I want to be mindful of for next time?
And I feel like that approach is so infused with self-compassion.
Yes.
And if you want to change, or I'll speak for myself, if I want to change, the only way to do so is through being compassionate with myself.
Amen.
If I am stuck in shame, nothing is changing. I will be stuck in that shame spiral, those ruminating thoughts you were talking about. And like you said, I can't change the outcome, and then I'm not changing my behavior. So it's a one-way ticket to stuckness. And then when you can infuse a little bit of compassion, a little bit of understanding for yourself, that's when you can identify what needs to change and feel confident and strong enough to make those changes for next time.
Amen. Amen. Yeah, it was amazing when Kristin Neff's work came out and started to become more prolific around self-compassion several years ago, maybe 10 or so years ago or more. And I started bringing her work into my work. That was the missing piece. Because I do a lot of cognitive therapy. I do a lot of emotional processing. I do a lot of the more kind of cerebral stuff and some of the bodywork stuff as well. But it was bringing in that space for that compassionate curiosity and just the space to let ourselves be these imperfect humans, not as an excuse, but as a starting point to be able to say, wow, like I messed that up and there's what's going on here. And I wonder what was feeling vulnerable. I wonder what I was thinking. That's part of being human. And so what do I want to do with that? Because judging, criticizing, berating, or beating myself up is exactly what you said, Deanna. It's going to keep me stuck in self-loathing. And that's not really productive.
Mm-mm. And can we all just take a moment of gratitude for Kristen Neff
Oh
and
my
her
gosh.
work?
Yes.
Cultivating
Yes.
self-compassion is like, it is the work of my life. It is something that I will always be working towards. But
Yeah.
her work and what she has put out into the world has helped me on such a deep level. So just Kristen Neff, if you're listening, you're amazing. We appreciate you.
Yeah. Shout out to Dr. Neff.
Yes, shout out. And you touched on this a little bit, but from your perspective, what are some of the different ways that overthinking and overworrying can either get you stuck or keep you stuck?
It's when we don't know how to turn it off. And so we get in these like spirals, and our brains can take off very quickly. It can be like this runaway train, just like barreling down the track. And the more it goes, the more momentum it gets, and the harder it is to rein it in. Because then our brains will start going to all of these worst case scenarios, all of these situations from the past where things were a disaster, or we screwed up, or something didn't go the way that we wanted to, we failed, we had a misstep. And it'll just start collecting all of this stuff, making us feel worse and worse and worse, so that we can be very convinced that the feeling we're having, the feeling of fear, or that things are going to go terribly, or worry or stress, it can feel like this is the only option to feel, because I've got all this evidence to support it from the past, from the future, from the present, like all of this. I've collected all of this stuff to really just support exactly how I'm feeling right now and the thoughts that I'm having right now. And the overthinking that I'm doing right now, get even more stuck in it. And so, like we were talking about, the reason why we get stuck in it is because we are trying to protect ourselves in some way. And because human beings, there's three things that we all desperately want and that drive the majority of our behavior, but none of the three exist. So the three things that drive so much of our behavior is full control, full certainty, and full comfort. And none of those are possible. They are all just big fat illusions that motivate so much of our being. And it's leaning into, and as anxiety producing as it can be at first, it's leaning into the fact that I don't have control over the outcome. I have some say, I have some influence, but I don't even have full control over what's going to happen in 5 minutes. And there's this very vulnerable thing that comes from that realization, but the acceptance of it can also be incredibly powerful. And we don't have full certainty. We have no idea. And I think the pandemic taught us that one day we're like, go in a science world or the aquarium, or a play date with our kids and their friends, and the next day we're inside for months, or not able to be around other people or in public spaces for months. And it happened like that. And full comfort, this idea that we're going to get somewhere in our lives where it's going to just arrive and be a free ride. Life never promised any of those things to us. And we also wouldn't be satisfied if we had full comfort. As humans, we need a little bit of tension, because that's what keeps us moving and growing and experimenting and experiencing. And that's so much a part of what we need as human beings.
I've never heard it broken down in that structure, but I got a chill when you said it, because literally my entire life is seeking control, certainty, and comfort. Like that is what drives so much of my overthinking, my worry, but just my behaviors and my thought patterns in general. And you're right. Those things are not tangible. They're not things that we're ever going to like get an award that says, here's a gold star. You are now in control. Like that's
Yeah,
not how life works.
it's not. And how much of our mental well-being is being compromised in the pursuit of these things that don't exist.
And you mentioned that the acceptance that we don't have control or certainty or comfort. can really change our experience. So, asking for a friend, how exactly do you do that? How do you lean into the acceptance and fight that urge to try to control and be certain and seek comfort?
Yeah. And that brings us to Tara Brach's work. And she pioneered a lot of the work on this concept of radical acceptance. So both radical acceptance and radical self-acceptance. And it doesn't mean that we don't plan or prepare or work hard or do our best. But when we are focused on process instead of outcome, that is a huge thing that makes a difference. But for you and I, Deanna, growing up in, I'm assuming like 80s and 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so much of the parenting was around outcome. You win or you lose, you pass or fail, you succeed or you don't. And it was like you got rewarded, you got acknowledged, you got accolades from your outcome only. And I'm not to say that outcomes don't matter, but they're not the only thing that matter. And I think we're understanding now how much anxiety that produces in a human being when you're only being valued based on your outcome instead of actually taking a step back and looking at process and effort. And so I think maybe in some ways we've gone a little too far the other way and we're only praising effort. And so the people that are like winning, they're like, well, what's the point of even trying to win if you don't even get an award? Everyone just gets a happy face for participating. That's a bit extreme. But let's look at both of those things. Like, how do I want to show up today? And we look at these two different motivating factors that change our experience of being human. So this sort of anxiety producing, overstressing, overthinking kind of motivation comes from this, what can I perfect? Who can I please? What can I earn? Who can I impress? So those are very like outcome-based things. But if we change the motivation to more of a process orientation of what can I learn? How can I grow? What can I overcome? Who can I serve? It changes everything because then I, for lack of a better word, I have control over how I show up, but I don't have control over the outcome. So if I can show up and give my best and do my best and be proud of how I show up, then that wipes away all of that need to control the outcome, or at least a lot of it, because I am in charge of the thing that I actually can be in charge of, and that feels good.
Talk about things that will make you feel stuck. Being overly concerned with an outcome. I think lots of people, it can be addicting going after those accolades, those gold stars, those successes, but it can rob you of the joy of just doing the thing. And if you're focused on the process, and as you said, you're proud of how you're showing up and you're doing what you're doing in alignment with your values and your drive and what's important to you, like, what a way to not get caught up in that. I have to be the best. I need to be perfect. I need to perform and win stuckness.
Yes. Yeah, and it's difference between excellence and perfection. Like, I strive to be excellent, but excellent is a me thing. Excellent isn't compared to anybody else. Excellent isn't based on an outcome. Excellent is about me showing up and giving my best and being prepared and being present and bringing my full self to something. And then how the outcome of that is going to be what it's going to be. But there's so much less pressure when I don't say, oh, I have to achieve this specific outcome and it has to go exactly like this, and all these outside factors that aren't really in my control, then that produces a whole lot of anxiety. But if I can bring it back to me, and again, that internal, right? That internal locus of control, we talk about in psychology, the external locus of control and the internal locus of control. And what I do have and what I am in charge of is the internal stuff and how I want to be bringing myself and how I want to be showing up and the effort I want to be giving and the work I want to do and the learning that I want to undertake. That is a me thing. And then all of a sudden it becomes this experience of expansion and experimenting. And then it becomes, dare I say, kind of fun.
There are so many different ways to go from stuck to unstuck. But one of the most productive, learning. Learning something new can help you expand your skill set and find new interest. and in the process, help you get unstuck. And if you want to learn something new, you will definitely want to check out Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that offers thousands of classes designed to help you learn, grow, and tap into your creativity, all of which can help you make the journey from stuck to unstuck. And right now, Skillshare is offering a free month to new members. If you want to access Skillshare's entire library of classes and get the education and instruction you need to shake off the stuckness, just visit seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare and sign up for your free trial today. Again, that's seasonofstuck.com/Skillshare. And that's also doable. Excellence is doable. As you said, you have control. You can do excellent. But no matter how excellent we are, we will all fail.
Absolutely.
It's part of being a human. There is no such thing as perfection. So that feels like it would alleviate so much anxiety and so much overthinking and worry.
Absolutely. Again, this perfection, this like goal, this goalpost that the closer we get to it, the more it becomes out of reach. And this idea that there is some perfect point that we can get to, and the amount of pressure that puts on us and the amount of anxiety that that creates. You said something else there, Deanna.
I said that excellence is doable, but no
Yes.
matter how excellent you are, we all fail.
Yes.
Perfection is not attainable.
But you know how you don't fail? You don't show up. You don't try anything. You don't do anything. You don't experience anything. You don't grow in any way. I mean, you can prevent yourself from failing. It's just going to make life pretty boring.
If you don't try, essentially. Because if you don't try, you can't fail. But
failure is part of it. And failure, I think we've connotated this like negative association with the word failure instead of being like, I ask my kids, what did you fail at today? It's like, because you tried something. That means you tried something. That means you pushed yourself beyond what you have the capacity for at this point. But that's great. That's how you grow, is to like just venture into something somewhere. And then you come away from that. And failure is like this beautiful learning opportunity. It doesn't mean that I am a failure. It means that I have more to learn, that I have something else to try, that I have some skills to develop, that I have some knowledge to gain. That's all that it means. And we've associated this really negative thing with it, but we're calling ourselves failure. Like you wouldn't call someone who had never ridden a bike before a failure if they fell off the bike the first time they went on it. You wouldn't be like, oh, you're a terrible human. You suck at being human because you fell off your bike. You'd be like, oh, you haven't learned yet. Let me help you.
that's such a helpful reframe. I've been thinking similarly of stuckness, because stuckness is a sort of failure. And the way that I've been thinking about it, particularly lately, is that feeling stuck or feeling like you failed, it's just a stepping stone. It always precedes growth. It always precedes positive change. If you fail, then like you said, you're learning, and then you get to take that new knowledge and then try again.
And that's exactly it. It really depends on how we're going to frame failure. And really, you've probably heard it said too a lot in any kind of building, any kind of success in any way. The experts always say, get really good at failing. You want to be successful? Get really good at failing, and allowing failure to almost be a bit of this badge of honor that you put yourself out there and tried. And I think so much about this, tying this back into perfectionism, and how failure is such a threat to perfectionism, that when we really struggle with perfectionism, we won't try something because the threat of what we are going to make failure mean about us is actually loaded with all this shame. And perfectionism is this like desperate race away from shame. It's this huge effort to like outrun or outperform or outplease shame. And so if there is a risk of failure, there's a risk of more shame, and shame cannot handle more shame. And so shame says, don't try because you're probably going to fail. But if we didn't see failure as this compounding shame effect, then it wouldn't feel so scary.
As you're talking about perfectionism, I would imagine that people who identify with perfectionism also likely identify with overthinking and worry. I'm curious, are there any types of people that are more likely to be worriers or overthinkers than others?
I guess it's a good question. It depends on what kind of overthinking, because people will overthink about different things. This is one of the skills I teach in this YouTube video that's going to be coming out. Start to just notice what you're overthinking about and write it down. And knowing that there will be some repeat offenders in there, there's going to be some like patterns in your overthinking. Like you might not be overthinking about what you're going to wear that day, but you might be overthinking about what's going to be happening in a meeting at work. Or you might not be overthinking about what you're going to eat for dinner that night, but you might be overthinking about a conversation you had with someone a few nights before where you put your foot in your mouth, or at least you think you did. So just start to notice what maybe you are overthinking about what you're going to have for dinner. Maybe you are overthinking about what clothes you're going to wear. And then just start to notice some of those patterns, because there will be themes in the things that you're overthinking about. So then from there, it's really just taking a step back and looking at there's different roots to different types of overthinking. So if you're overthinking about a past thing that you said or what someone said to you and what they mean by that, or overthinking how you came across or how people are perceiving you, that could be an overthinking related to your sense of self, your self-esteem, your self-confidence, your just sense of self-worth. If you are overthinking about things in the future that could happen, disasters, catastrophes, failures, just even not positive outcomes, anything less than wonderful, then it could be more about that sort of perfectionism and wanting everything to go well. If you're thinking about things that could go wrong with a family member, like someone getting sick, someone dying, and I know that can be very common intrusive thoughts for people around something terrible happening to a child or a parent or a friend or themselves, then that can be just a lot of that kind of just pure worry anxiety. So there's perfectionism anxiety, and then there's like fear-based worry anxiety. So this is why we just want to get curious and look at, okay, what things do I find myself overthinking about? And then from there, I can look more at what the root is, and then I'm going to start working on the root of that.
So it sounds like we all have our own brands or
Yeah,
flavors
I was
of
going to say,
overthinking.
of overthinking.
Yes. And I'm going to guess that the answer is yes. But is there any correlation with the things that we tend to overthink and worry about and our values? So, for example, if I am finding myself overthinking about the way that I am perceived or what I said yesterday, could that be because connection or belonging is a core value?
That's a great question of whether or not it's a core value, but it could be a deep desire. I desire to feel loved, to feel accepted, to feel important, to feel wanted. And so if that is one of my desires, and that could go down to a core value, it could go down to a core injury as well. If I grew up in a household where I didn't feel those things, then I'm going to feel that lack and really be trying to find it and seek it out and not feel secure in it. Because if it wasn't developed in a secure way at home growing up, then I'm going to bring that with me and not feel that sense of belonging or love or acceptance. So I'm going to be really trying to seek it out.
That's so interesting. Because when you were saying that, I was thinking about myself. I have a tendency to really overthink about how I show up in relationships because my relationships are so important to me. I really value connection and I want to be the best wife and friend and sister and daughter that I can be. And I always tied that back to, oh, it's because connection is one of my values. But you're right. It could also be this deep desire from when you go all the way back, things that experiences that I had, or instances where I felt like I didn't belong or I couldn't connect and have carried those with me into adulthood.
And again, our core values can be birthed from that, right? It can be birthed from like, I didn't have this, but I really want it. And that's one of my core values. It could also be if you did grow up with a family that very strongly prioritized connection and relationships, where you're like, yeah, like this is one of my core values. This is one of the main things in my life. It doesn't always have to come from a lack. It can come from a history of presence. So just really, again, that's the thing with human psychology, is that we are so complex as beings. And so bring us back to what we were talking about at the beginning. The goal is to just get curious.
Yes, I love that.
Usually I would say, Deanna, if it's coming from a place of anxiety, it's probably because of a lack. If it's coming from a place of abundance, then it's coming from a place of abundance, right? If I felt abundantly loved and accepted and cared for, then I'm going to have this outpouring of that from others. But if there was deprivation of that or a lack of that, then I'm going to be trying to make up for it. And it's going to feel a little bit more of this anxious energy behind it because I want it and I don't know if I can get it.
What a helpful measuring stick to understand motivations. Like you said, we are so complex. And to go back to your point about control and certainty, I always find myself wanting to know the answer, like certainty. Why do I do this? Why am I this way? And it's just like, there is no answer. There's no certainty. It's so many different things wrapped into one in unique and different ways for every single one of us. And that acceptance and that curiosity can maybe alleviate some of that.
Absolutely. So in creating, instead of having certainty, just working to create more understanding. And curiosity creates more understanding. Like, I'm a very curious person. I ask a lot of questions like, tell me more about this. I want to wrap my head around that. I want to grasp this. What's happening here? With all the topics that I'm interested in, I always want to know when I'm working with clients, when I'm having conversations with people, like, tell me more about this. Like, I'm not great at small talk. People will be like, oh yeah, I'm scared of flying. And I'm like, okay, tell me about your primary experience with feeling. And it can, like, where did this come from? Did you grow up in a loving household? Were your parents available for you? Like, I'm not very good at small talk. I'm like, tell me more about this. I want to understand. Yeah. And I think that you can come with a curious mind into life and with a seeking mind. I like referring to people like us as seekers. We're just always seeking more. And maybe this drive, this thirst for understanding is never going to be fully quenched. But if we can look at it as, but I am just going to thoroughly drink in the process.
So this is all incredible. And we've talked a lot about the importance of curiosity in this approach. But let's say I come to you and I say, I am stuck. I am overthinking. I am worrying all the time. I'm losing time in my thoughts and I need to change. What steps or exercises would you recommend I do in that moment to unstuck myself a bit?
I'd first ask you one question. What are you afraid of?
It's really interesting that you bring that up because I've thought a lot about overthinking and worrying through the lens of control, but haven't thought about it very much through the lens of fear.
Control is an attempt to overcome fear.
And so, in the midst of that overthinking, that worrying, asking ourselves, what am I afraid of? And then what do we do with that information? Do we sit with it? Do we journal about it? Like, how can we relate to the things that we're afraid of in a way that helps us alleviate this desire or habit of worrying and overthinking things?
It's a good question. That is where the deeper work comes in, and doing a little bit of that exploring. We can use this arrow down technique. And it comes with asking a question that's a little bit tongue in cheek. So once you identify, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of failing. And then ask yourself, well, so what? So what if you fail? Well, then people are going to judge me. So what? Well, then I'll be all alone. So what? Well, then I won't have anyone in my life. So what? And then once you get down to it, you can see that there's like this irrational fear that if I fail, no one will want me. And then be like, but wait a second, is that actually true? Right? Oftentimes, the root of a lot of our behavior is these deeper down fears that actually don't hold a lot of water, but they drive a lot of our behavior.
So it's this idea of playing the tape all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Continue asking yourself all of those questions,
Yeah,
peeling away the layers of the onion until you get to the root or the source of what's really going on.
absolutely.
It's so interesting that you brought up that your example was about this fear of being alone, because when I am worrying and overthinking and I do that exercise of playing the tape to the end, really getting to what the core of what I'm actually worrying or overthinking about, it is generally this fear of being alone or unlovable or
Not good enough.
not good enough, not worthy, all of those things. It really, even if it's something that on the surface feels so disjointed and not in any way connected to that core fear of being unlovable or unworthy of love and community and support, when I really do the work and go deep down, it is almost always connected to that in some way.
Yeah. And then so really look at, if I fail at this endeavor, am I going to be socially rejected from my friends and family? Wait a second. Wait a second. Yeah. So just looking a little bit deeper and then asking ourselves, like, so what if this happens? What am I making that mean? And it comes down to these thoughts that I have that I've attached to this thing. But are those thoughts even true?
Can you tell me a little bit about how to go about challenging those thoughts? Because oftentimes they feel so true. Even if logically you know that they're not true, they can feel
Yeah.
so true.
And often our thoughts feel really true just because they're the only thoughts we've ever thought. A belief is just a repeated thought that we've never really thought to challenge. So we need to start practicing different thoughts and start really looking at not just any old thoughts. This isn't about just telling yourself, like, that's not true. I'm God's gift to humanity and everything I touch will turn to gold. Your brain's gonna be like, no, that's not true. That's not the way that it works. So you're not gonna actually believe it. It's not gonna help. But if we start finding some holes in our logic and start challenging some of those thoughts and really just looking at, what thoughts have I been letting my brain get away with thinking without even considering whether or not that's a helpful, reasonable, rational, useful, productive thought.
Julia, I feel like you have given me a workbook full of exercises that I can now use to better understand and address this tendency that I have to overthink and to worry and to spiral. So, thank you for that. I know that all of the listeners are going to be so appreciative, but I feel like personally, for me, this was just, oh, thank you so much. As we are nearing the end of the episode, so on Season of Stuck, we like to wrap things up with a couple of questions. So, thinking about your ideal future self, like the Julia that you are working every day to one day grow into, if she could travel back in time and speak to the current version of you and give you advice on how to navigate stuckness in this period of your life, what do you think she would say?
There are people less qualified than you, less experienced than you, and less of an expert than you who are doing what you want to be doing simply because they've decided that they can. Get out of your own way and get going. You have what it takes. Put in the work, put in the time, but do not let your self doubt drive the bus anymore.
That is so powerful. And I can confirm you definitely have what it takes for whatever it is that you want to do.
I got stuck in that for a long time, Deanna. My self doubt gremlin was a
Mm.
beast. It was a beast. And my perfectionist brain, you have to be the best in order just to make the mark. This isn't about being better than anyone else, but you have to be the best just to be barely good enough.
Aren't those inner gremlins such a trip? I really wish that I had the cute gizmo gremlin, the little fluffy one, instead of the crazy lizard like ones, but you get what you get, I guess.
And we learn this is part of my process and it's all grist for the mill.
That was beautiful. And I think a good reminder for all of us to get out of our own way and not let self doubt stop us from doing the things that we want and are meant to do.
Right?
So the next few questions are just rapid fire. So I'm going to ask a question. You just say the first thing that comes to mind. Favorite movie of all time?
Sense and Sensibility.
That's a good one. I love a good period romance.
Yeah.
Go-to coffee order?
Just a plain dark roast, 2 sugars, 1 cream.
Love it. If you could have any animal in the world as a pet, what would it be?
My dog.
Mm,
I love
that's
my
how
dog.
that's how I feel about my dogs. I'm like, I would choose them over any other animal in the universe, let alone the planet.
Or a lion that I didn't have to fear would eat me.
Like a tame lion.
A
Like just
tame lion that had no killer instinct in it, just to snuggle up with and like,
what a snuggle sesh that would be. Can you imagine just being like snuggling with a
oh,
lion?
yes.
Okay, and then last question. Best concert you have ever been to?
Naturally 7. It
Mm.
was this a cappella group that I saw probably, I would guess, 25 years ago in a high school auditorium. Their plane was late. They came rushing in. All they had was microphones, no setup because all they needed was microphones because their voices were their instruments. And they gave one of the best, most exciting concerts I'd ever been to. It was 7 guys and their voices, all a cappella, incredible.
That is amazing. I also love, love, love acapella. Well, Julia, this has been such an incredible conversation. Thank you for sharing your insights. I know that this was, as I mentioned, not just helpful for me, but will be helpful for all of the other overthinkers and warriors out there. If listeners want to connect with you or learn more about your work, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, YouTube is a great place to connect. Also, my Instagram, for those who are on Instagram, I'm just at Julia Counsellor, counselor with 2 L's because I'm Canadian. And that's how we spell it around these parts. But yeah, I think even if you just Google search Julia Kristina, Kristina with a K, there aren't very many of us. And I seem to be the one that has more of a public profile. So pretty easy to find that way.
And you also have a course that is tailored to chronic worriers and overthinkers, the Shift Society, correct?
Yes, that is a membership community where I have in there a very powerful 5-step tool for getting a handle on this large, 8-pound mass between our 2 ears and really understanding what's going on in our human brains and how to manage our mind and our emotions no matter whoever or whatever is going on either inside or around us. And we go thoroughly into that, bringing in, these pieces of cognitive therapy, self-compassion, radical acceptance, and everything in between.
That sounds amazing. I will be checking that out, and I will also pop a link in the show notes. Again, Julia, thank you so much. This has been so great.
Thank you so much, Deanna.
That's it for today. A huge thank you to our guests for their incredible insights, and a huge thank you to you, our listeners. We know that there are so many podcasts out there to choose from, and we are just so grateful that you chose ours. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider recommending the podcast to a friend or family member that you think would enjoy it. And to make sure that you never miss an episode, subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever it is you get your podcasts. And while you're there, if you loved the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review. It plays such a huge part in getting this podcast out to a wider audience and ultimately supporting more people on their journey from stuck to unstuck. And to keep in touch and access even more stuck-related content, follow us on Instagram at Season of Stuck and visit our website, seasonofstuck.com, where you can sign up to get episodes delivered directly to your inbox. Thank you again for being here. It is so, so appreciated. Until next time, I'm Deanna DeBera, and you're listening to Season of Stuck.